Fifth grade. Today we're going to be doing Module 3, Lesson 9, and we're finally going to be making like units and adding fractions the numerical way. So instead of doing number lines or picture models to add up our fractions, we're now just going to do it the number way, basically. So my first step for solving this problem right here, go ahead and write this on your desk, is I have a half plus a fifth. Now, normally you would draw a model to show both, but for today's, what we're going to do is we are going to be finding something called the least common multiple, the LCM, between these two numbers. And I'm going to show you what that looks like and how that's going to help me when I'm adding fractions and finding those common denominators. So my first step for this is I am going to be listing multiples of 2 and 5. So what that means is I'm going to list multiples of 2 and then I'm going to list multiples of 5. Since 5 is the greater number, I'm actually going to start with that one first. So 5 times 1 is just 5. 5 times 2 is 10. And I'll go up to 2. So I'm going to start with just 3 multiples right now, and then I'm going to see what I can do with my 2 and if I can reach any of these numbers. So 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 4, or 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 4 is 8, and 2 times 5 is 10. So I have a common multiple now. So my least common multiple is basically the smallest multiple that both of these numbers have. Because I could continue going because I know that 2 times 10 is 20 and 5 times 4 is 20. So that would be a common multiple, but it's not the smallest common multiple between these two numbers. So it's kind of like the opposite of what you're doing with the greatest common factor. So this tells me that both of these fractions could have a denominator of 10, and then I can add up those fractions. So what I need to do with this is, in parentheses, I'm going to rewrite the fraction a half, except this time I'm going to be multiplying it by a number that will help it get to that 10. So if I want my denominator to be 10, I have to think about, well, what do I have to multiply my denominator by to get to 10? Well, I know that 2 times 5 gets me to 10, so I'm going to multiply the bottom by 5, and whenever I do this, whatever I multiply the bottom by, I have to multiply the top by. So I put a 5 right here. Then I'm going to write an addition sign, and now I have to do the same thing with the fifth. So I write kind of a longer looking fraction like that. So I have 1/5. And I have to think about, what am I going to multiply 5 by to get to that least common multiple of 10? Well, I know that 5 times 2 is 10. And whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. And now I need to solve. So 1 times 5 is 5. And 2 times 5, I rewrite this fraction, is 10. So I have my 5/10 right there. And then I add, and then I have 1 times 2, which is 2, so that's my new numerator. And then I have 5 times 2, which is also 10. And now, since I have common denominators, I can now add. So when I add, I do 5 plus 2, which is 7. And then I keep my denominator of 10. When I look to simplify, that is when I would find the greatest common factor between these two numbers. And the greatest common factor between these two would be just the number 1, so my answer is simplified. So this one would be 7/10. So when you're trying to make those common denominators, you want to get your LCM so that you can get common denominators like 10 and 10. And when you want to simplify, that is when you have to find the greatest common factor. So it's 2 different processes that I have to do for those problems. And we'll keep working on that until we get used to it. But make sure you're practicing those facts. So let's try another problem. If you want to try this one on your own, you can. If not, you can do it along with me. So for this problem, we are actually going to be skipping to problem 3, which is a half plus 2/3. So for this one, I'm going to start listing my multiples for my LCM. So I have 2 and 3. So the last time I showed you a strategy where I just kind of like did a couple of factors for my largest number, and then I did a couple factors until I matched them. For this one, I'm going to go back and forth until I find a least common multiple between these two. So I'll do 2 times 1, which is 2, and I'll do 3 times 1, which is 3. Then I'll move back up to this one. I'll do 2 times 2, which is 4, and then I'll do 3 times 2, which is 6. Then I will do, and then I'll do 2 times 3, which is 6. And then I'm just going to stop right there. Yes, I could have done 3 times 3, which is 9. But I just found my least common multiple. I found 2 numbers that match. So that means that my common denominator between these two can be 6. I just have to figure out which number I need to multiply both of these fractions by to get to that 6. So I'm going to write my parentheses, my fractions inside them. So I have 1/2 times, and I have to figure out what I need to multiply these by. So 2 times what will equal 6? Well, I know that 2 times 3 will equal 6, and 1 times 3, I have to do that because whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. Then I go ahead and add, and I write my next set of parentheses with my fraction inside of it. So now I have 2/3 times 2 over 3. And I multiply, and I think about, well, what does 3 times 2, 3 times what would equal 6? So I put a 2 right here, and remember, whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. And now I just go ahead and solve these on the inside and write my new fractions so I can finally add. So I do 1 times 3, which is 3, and then I do 2 times 3, which is 6, and I have a new fraction, 3/6, but remember, this is equivalent to 1/2. We're just saying it a different way. And then I write my new fraction for 2 times 2, which is 4, and 3 times 2, which is 6. So for this problem right here, I am going to go ahead and add these up now that I can because I have common denominators. And I do 3 plus 4, which is 7 over 6. And remember, this kind of fraction is called an improper fraction, and I don't like having those kinds of fractions. So just like I showed you in previous lessons, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a whole. So since my denominator is 6, I'm going to write 6 over 6 plus the remainder. So 7 minus 6 is 1 over 6 because I keep that same denominator. And then this is just going to equal 6 over 6 is 1. And then 1/6 will get attached to it. There's no way I can simplify that. So my final answer for this problem is 1 and 1/6. And I know that makes sense because I know 2/3 is greater than half of a whole, and 1/2 is exactly at half. So that would make sense that my answer is over a whole by just a little bit. So let's take a look at our next problem, and you can go ahead and start trying to do these on your own. And it's very important that you're thinking about your facts and practicing those facts. You can use your multiplication chart on your desk and list out those facts. If it helps you, then find the least common multiples like that as well. But keep practicing those facts. So now I have 5/9 plus 5/6. And again, I have to find the least common multiple between these two numbers. So I always start with my denominators. So I have 9 and 6, and again, I'm going to go back and forth until I find a common factor. So 9 times 1 is 9, and 6 times 1 is 6. 9 times 2 is 18, and 6 times 2 is 12. 9 times 3 is 27, but 6 times 3 is 18. I'm going to stop now because if I paid attention, I found that I now have 2 matching numbers in my rows, and that is 18. So that means that I can multiply my denominators to get to 18, and then I can add those up. So I write my parentheses with my fraction in the middle, and I'm going to rewrite this 5/9, but give some space so that I can write my multiplication problem. And now I think about, well, 9 times what equals that 18? Well, 9 times 2 equals 18, and whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. and I do my addition sign, and then I'll write my new set of fractions over here. Write 5, 6, and I think about, well, 6 times what is 18? And I know that 6 times 3 is 18, and whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to this half, and now I can solve. So over here, I do 5 times 2, which is 10, and 9 times 2, which is 18. So I got a new equivalent fraction of 10/18. And then I will add. And then for this one, I have 5 times 3, which is 15, and 6 times 3, which is 18. So I now have these common denominators, and that means that I can add them up. So for this one, I have 10 plus 15, which gives me 25. And if you have a difficulty with adding these numbers up in your head, you can always set up a standard algorithm like this to help you solve these problems. And then my numerator will, or sorry, my denominator will always stay the same. So right now I have 25/18. And since this is an improper fraction, because my numerator is larger than my denominator, I need to fix that and make it a mixed number. So remember, to do that, I create a whole. So since my numerator is, or sorry, my denominator is 18, then I need to put 18 over 18, so I can make a whole plus the remainder. And again, this is something that I have an algorithm for. No shame in doing that. 6/8, which is 7. So I would have 7/18 as my remainder from that. So now 18 over 18 is just one whole, and then 7 over 18 would be my remainder from that. So my final answer would be 1 7/18. This cannot be simplified because the greatest common factor between these numbers is only 1. Remember, if you have any questions, please make sure you're asking for help as you're going through these problems with me. These are a little difficult, but I think you might have an easier time than the number lines or the picture models. So we're going to move on to our final problem, which is kind of a doozy, but I think you guys will be able to do it. So we have 2/3 plus a fourth plus a half. So now I have 3 fractions I need to add up all together. And you might look at this and go, oh my gosh, there's no way I can do it. But it's not that difficult. So again, I have to find my LCM. You always have to do that when you're finding these like units, and you'll have to do that on your problem set and your homework sets. And then I will list all my denominators. I'm going to do it in increasing order, so 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm going to start with just my multiples of 1, my multiples of 2, and so on. So 2 times 1 is 2, 3 times 1 is 2, 4 times 1, 3 times 1 is 3, and then 4 times 1 is 4. Still don't have a common multiple yet, so I move on. 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 2 is 8. Still don't have a common multiple, so I keep going. 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9, and 4 times 3 is 12. And spoiler alert, eventually it's going to be 12, but I'll keep going to show you that. So 2 times 4 is 8, and then 3 times 4 is 12. So again, I found that matching 12, so I would continue with this. I've gotten 16. And then I'll keep going with this just to show you that eventually you will get 12 for all 3 of these. And if you really know your facts, you can start looking at these problems and just kind of knowing without having to do all this work. But eventually your least common multiple is going to be 12. So practice, practice, practice those facts. So for this one, we're going to do kind of a lot of work, but the end goal is that I want all my denominators to be 12. So for this one right here, I'm going to write my parentheses and my fraction. So I have 2/3 times. So I think about 3 times what is, where am I? That is 12. So 3 times 4. And then whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. And then I'll add, and I'll write a new set of parentheses with a fraction in it. And I'll write a fourth. And I have to think about 4 times what is 12? 4 times 3 is 12, so I put that there. And now I have to do the same thing, but for my very last fraction. And so I write that half in there, and then I multiply it by what I need to make my denominator 12. So 2 times 6 is 12, and then whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top, and now I'll write my new fractions. So 2 times 4 is 8, and 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 times 3 is 3, 4 times 3 is 12, plus 1 times 6 is 6, and 2 times 6 is 12. So now I need to add up these three fractions together, but I can because they all have the same denominator. And I can do this into like little parts to make it easier for myself. So I can think of, well, what's 8 twelfths plus 3 twelfths? That would be 11 twelfths plus 6 twelfths, which would equal 17 twelfths. And from there, I can now solve. I have an improper fraction, so I need to make sure that I change that. So I create a whole out of 12 twelfths, and then I add the remainder. So 17 minus 12 is 5 twelfths. Create my whole, create my 5 twelfths. I don't need to simplify because the greatest common factor between these is only 1, and that would be my final answer for this problem. Remember, if you need help, you can always come to the back table and do a small group with me because this is kind of a newer concept for you, but continue working at it and trying your best. For your problem set today, you're going to be doing problems A through F, and then word problem number 3. And then for your homework tonight, it's pretty similar. You're going to be doing numbers 1, A through F, and then number 2, word problem number 2. Please, before you start on your problem set, copy down your homework and put your homework book in your backpack so that you're ready for tonight and you don't forget about doing that practice. After that, you can work on the problem set. Good luck and let me know if you need help.